At exactly 3 hours, General Morrison approached the vigil site in full dress uniform, accompanied by the senior American military officials present. The moment had come to formally conclude what had become an historic demonstration of international military cooperation and mutual respect. The general positioned himself at the appropriate distance and called the assembly to attention. The crowd, which had grown to over 500 people, immediately responded with respectful silence. Even the children present seemed to understand the significance of what was about to occur. Marcus and Lieutenant Commander Chen maintained their positions until given the appropriate signal, demonstrating the same discipline they had shown throughout the entire vigil. When General Morrison rendered a formal salute to all 4 soldiers, they responded in perfect unison, creating a moment that photographers and observers would remember for the rest of their lives. The formal conclusion began with General Morrison addressing the crowd briefly, explaining the significance of what they had all witnessed. He spoke about military traditions that transcended national boundaries, about the bonds that connected professional soldiers regardless of which flag they served, and about the spontaneous demonstration of respect that had honored both British and American military values. Guardsman Collins and his partner were formally relieved of their posts in a carefully choreographed ceremony that acknowledged their exceptional performance under extraordinary circumstances. As they departed their positions for the first time in hours, the crowd erupted in sustained applause that continued for several minutes. Marcus felt a profound sense of completion as he finally relaxed from his formal stance. The 3 hours had passed both quickly and slowly, each moment distinct yet part of a larger whole that had created something unprecedented in his military experience. His uniform was soaked with perspiration, his legs were stiff from the extended standing, but his sense of accomplishment was absolute. Lieutenant Commander Chen moved to shake hands with both royal guards, a gesture that was immediately followed by Marcus and then by the senior officers present. The handshakes were brief but meaningful, soldier-to-soldier recognition that transcended words or formal protocols. The media coverage reached its climax as photographers captured the final moments of the vigil and the informal ceremony that concluded it. The images would be shared around the world within hours, becoming symbols of international military cooperation and the power of spontaneous gesture to create meaningful connections between people and cultures. Colonel Harrison presented both American officers with commemorative coins from the Royal Guard Regiment, a gesture that had been quickly arranged during the final hour of the vigil. General Morrison added personal commendations, recognizing their demonstration of military bearing and international fellowship under exceptional circumstances. Ambassador Wells approached to thank both officers personally for their representation of American military values. She expressed her belief that their actions had accomplished more for diplomatic relations than months of formal meetings and negotiations could have achieved, demonstrating the power of authentic respect and genuine character. The crowd began to disperse slowly, with many observers reluctant to leave the scene of what they clearly recognized as a historic moment. Veterans approached to shake hands with all 4 soldiers. Civilians offered thanks and congratulations, and children who had watched the entire demonstration left with a new understanding of dedication and service. Marcus and Lieutenant Commander Chen were escorted to a nearby facility where they could recover from their extended vigil. Palace staff had arranged for refreshments and medical attention if needed. Though both officers had come through the experience in good condition, despite the physical demands involved. The Royal Guards, after their formal relief, were also provided with appropriate care and recognition for their performance. Their ability to maintain perfect bearing despite unprecedented circumstances had been noted by their superiors and would become part of their regimental history. As Marcus finally had a chance to reflect on the morning's events, he realized that what had begun as a simple gesture of respect had evolved into something that would likely influence his understanding of military service for the rest of his career. The connection he had felt with the Royal Guards, the response of the crowd, and the international attention the event had received all spoke to fundamental values that transcended individual service or national identity. The social media response continued to grow throughout the day, with the story being shared and discussed across multiple platforms and in several languages. Military personnel from around the world added their own perspectives and experiences, creating a global conversation about the meaning of service and the bonds that connected professional soldiers everywhere. News outlets carried the story as a positive example of international cooperation and military professionalism. Editorial writers and commentators noted how the spontaneous nature of the demonstration made it more meaningful than any planned ceremony could have been, demonstrating authentic values rather than choreographed diplomacy. In the weeks that followed, the story would be used in military training programs as an example of how individual actions could represent larger values and create significant positive impacts. The images and video from the vigil would be shared in leadership courses and professional development programs across multiple military services. For Marcus, the experience became a defining moment in his military career, not because of the attention it received, but because it had allowed him to demonstrate the values that had drawn him to military service in the first place. The 3-hour vigil represented everything he believed about honor, respect, dedication, and the bonds that connected soldiers across all boundaries. The Royal Guards returned to their regular duties the following day, but they carried with them the memory of an extraordinary morning, when their solitary vigil had become a shared demonstration of military excellence. Their tradition had been honored in a way that would be remembered and discussed for years to come, adding new meaning to their daily service at the palace gates. The next morning brought an atmosphere of tension that only Marcus seemed to detect. The surveillance team had returned, but this time they were different, more focused, more purposeful in their movements. Where yesterday they had been gathering intelligence, today they appeared to be conducting final preparations for something significant. Marcus arrived at work 30 minutes early, using the extra time to study the street from different vantage points. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The team had grown to at least 6 individuals, and they had established overlapping fields of observation that covered every approach to the embassy. More concerning was the presence of 2 unmarked vans parked at strategic locations within a 3-block radius. James Morrison arrived at his usual time, coffee in hand and apparently without a care in the world. When Marcus approached him with his updated observations, Morrison's reaction was predictably dismissive. "Thompson, you're becoming obsessed with these supposed watchers. Maybe you need to take some time off, clear your head." Sarah Chen, who overheard the conversation, added her own opinion. "Marcus, I think James is right. You've been jumpy lately. Yesterday you were convinced those tourists outside were conducting surveillance. Today it's delivery drivers. Maybe you should consider talking to someone about stress management." The words stung not because they were cruel, but because Marcus knew how they sounded to people who had never operated in hostile environments. To them, his vigilance appeared as paranoia, his experience as anxiety. They had no way of understanding that what they dismissed as nervous behavior was actually the result of training that had kept him alive in situations where most people would have died. David Walsh, eager to impress his more senior colleagues, chimed in with what he thought was helpful advice. "You know, Marcus, when I was with the military police, we had a saying, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Maybe you're just seeing threats because you're looking for them." Marcus said nothing in response, but internally he noted the irony. Walsh's military police experience consisted of checking identification cards and breaking up bar fights on base. He had never been in a situation where real threats materialized without warning, where the ability to read subtle signs of danger was the difference between completing a mission and never coming home. As the morning progressed, Marcus continued his discreet monitoring while performing his assigned duties. The surveillance team had refined their positions, and he noticed they were now paying particular attention to the timing of certain embassy activities. When the diplomatic staff arrived for work, the watchers noted their vehicles and routes. When deliveries were made, they observed the security procedures. At 10:30, Marcus observed something that made his pulse quicken. One of the watchers had moved to a position that provided a direct line of sight to the ambassador's office window on the 2nd floor. The man was carrying what appeared to be a surveyor's instrument, but Marcus's trained eye recognized it as something far more sinister, a range-finding device used for calculating precise distances. Marcus immediately sought out Morrison, who was conducting a routine inspection of the metal detectors at the main entrance. "Sir, we have a serious problem. One of the individuals I've been tracking is now conducting what appears to be range-finding operations targeting the ambassador's office." Morrison looked up from his clipboard with barely concealed irritation. Thompson, I'm going to say this once more and then I don't want to hear about it again. There are no threats. There is no surveillance team. There are just ordinary people going about their daily business, and you're creating problems where none exist. The conversation was overheard by several other staff members, including embassy employees who began to look at Marcus with concern. Word spread quickly through the building that one of the security guards was having some kind of breakdown, seeing threats everywhere and disrupting normal operations with his paranoid observations. By lunchtime, Marcus found himself effectively isolated from his colleagues. They avoided making eye contact, spoke in whispers when he was nearby, and made it clear that they considered him a liability rather than an asset to the security team. The head of embassy administration even pulled Morrison aside to express concerns about Marcus's fitness for duty. But Marcus's isolation only sharpened his focus. Without the distraction of trying to convince skeptical colleagues, he was able to conduct a more thorough analysis of what he was seeing. The pattern that emerged was deeply troubling. The surveillance team was conducting a detailed study of the embassy's security procedures, personnel movements, and vulnerable points. During his lunch break, Marcus stepped outside and made a careful circuit of the surrounding area. What he discovered confirmed his worst suspicions. In addition to the obvious watchers, there were at least 3 more individuals positioned at key points around the embassy. They were maintaining radio contact using subtle hand signals and operating with a level of coordination that spoke of professional training. Most alarming was his discovery of the 2 unmarked vans he had noticed earlier. A closer inspection revealed that they were positioned to block the 2 main roads leading to the embassy. If someone wanted to prevent police or emergency services from reaching the building quickly, these vehicles were perfectly placed to create effective roadblocks. Marcus returned to his post with a growing sense of urgency. Whatever was being planned was moving into its final phases. The question was no longer whether something would happen, but when. Based on the patterns he had observed, Marcus estimated they had perhaps hours, not days, before the situation escalated dramatically. His attempts to communicate his concerns through normal channels had failed completely. Morrison now refused to even listen to his reports, and the other guards treated him as if he were mentally unstable. The embassy staff had been warned to be cautious around him, and he could see the fear and confusion in their eyes when he tried to approach them. Marcus faced a terrible choice. He could continue to work within the system, hoping that somehow his warnings would eventually be taken seriously, but that approach had clearly failed. Alternatively, he could take action based on his own assessment of the threat, but doing so would likely end his career and possibly land him in legal trouble. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus made his decision. His oath as a soldier had been to protect innocent people, regardless of the personal cost. That oath hadn't expired when he left the military, and it certainly didn't become void just because his current colleagues couldn't understand the gravity of what they were facing. He began to prepare for what he knew was coming. Drawing on skills and knowledge that none of his colleagues suspected he possessed, Marcus started making quiet preparations for the moment when his true capabilities would finally be revealed. The people around him still saw him as the unreliable, paranoid guard who jumped at shadows. They had no idea they were about to witness the emergence of one of the most lethal soldiers their country had ever produced. The attack came at precisely 2:15 in the afternoon, just as Marcus had predicted. The timing was no coincidence. It was the moment when the embassy staff would be returning from lunch, when the building would be at its most vulnerable, and when the afternoon shift change would create maximum confusion among the security personnel. Marcus was positioned at his usual post near the main gate when he saw the first gunman emerge from the unmarked van parked across the street. The man moved with the fluid precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times, his weapon concealed beneath a long coat until the very last second. To any casual observer, he might have looked like just another pedestrian crossing the street. But Marcus wasn't a casual observer. The moment he saw the man's movement pattern change from surveillance to assault, every alarm in his mind began screaming. Years of combat experience kicked in instantly, and time seemed to slow as his training took over. He could see the attack unfolding exactly as he had anticipated, like watching a movie he had already seen. The first shots came from a sniper positioned in a building across the street, the same man Marcus had identified the day before with the range-finding equipment. The bullets shattered the embassy's front windows and sent visitors and staff diving for cover. The sound of breaking glass mixed with screams of terror as people realized they were under attack. James Morrison, who had been standing near the metal detectors when the shooting started, dropped behind the reception desk with a look of absolute shock. His face had gone pale and his hands were shaking as he fumbled for his radio. The confident security professional who had dismissed Marcus's warnings just hours earlier was now paralyzed by the reality of the situation he had refused to believe could happen. Sarah Chen was crouched behind a concrete planter outside the main entrance. Her service weapon drawn, but her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold it steady. David Walsh had thrown himself behind one of the embassy vehicles and was calling frantically for police backup on his radio. The professional composure they had all displayed during training exercises evaporated in the face of real violence. Marcus, however, moved with a calmness that seemed almost supernatural. While his colleagues were still processing what was happening, he had already identified the primary threats and begun formulating a response. The sniper in the building across the street was the immediate priority. As long as he remained active, no one could move safely in or out of the embassy. Drawing on skills that none of his colleagues knew he possessed, Marcus analyzed the sniper's position and calculated the angles needed to neutralize the threat. The building across the street was approximately 150 meters away, with the shooter positioned on the 4th floor. It was a difficult shot under any circumstances, but the chaos around him made it nearly impossible. Marcus reached into his security locker and retrieved something that made Morrison's eyes widen in disbelief. Hidden beneath his standard-issue equipment was a precision rifle that had no business being in the hands of an ordinary security guard. The weapon was military-grade, configured for long-range accuracy and clearly maintained by someone who understood its capabilities intimately. "Thompson, what the hell is that?" Morrison shouted over the sound of gunfire. "Where did you get that weapon?" Marcus didn't answer. He was already moving toward a position that would give him a clear line of sight to the sniper's location. His movements were efficient and purposeful, displaying a level of tactical awareness that stunned his colleagues. This wasn't the quiet, unremarkable guard they thought they knew. This was someone else entirely. Sarah Chen, still crouched behind her concrete barrier, watched in amazement as Marcus advanced through the gunfire with apparent indifference to the bullets striking the ground around him. His expression was focused but calm, showing none of the panic that had overwhelmed the rest of the security team. He moved like someone who had been in similar situations many times before. The attacking force consisted of at least 8 armed individuals, working in coordinated teams to overwhelm the embassy's defenses. They had clearly studied the building's layout and the security procedures, timing their assault to exploit every weakness Marcus had tried to warn about. The 2 unmarked vans had indeed moved to block the main access routes, preventing rapid response from police units. Marcus reached his chosen firing position and began setting up his shot. The distance was challenging, but not beyond his capabilities. What made it truly difficult were the civilians still running for cover, the ongoing gunfire from multiple directions, and the pressure of knowing that every second he delayed meant more people could die. His colleagues watched in stunned silence as Marcus adjusted his scope and controlled his breathing with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. There was something almost mechanical about his movements, as if he had become a different person entirely. The transformation was so complete that they began to question whether they had ever really known him at all. David Walsh, huddled behind the embassy vehicle, found his voice long enough to shout a question that everyone was thinking. "Marcus, who the hell are you?" The answer came not in words but in action. Marcus's rifle fired once, a single, precisely placed shot that traveled across the street and found its target with devastating accuracy. The sniper who had been terrorizing the embassy from his 4th-floor perch suddenly went silent, his weapon clattering to the ground as he collapsed. The immediate effect was dramatic. With the sniper neutralized, the remaining attackers lost their overwatch and found themselves exposed. Marcus had eliminated their tactical advantage with one perfectly executed shot, demonstrating a level of skill that left his colleagues speechless. But the engagement was far from over. The remaining attackers, realizing they had lost their primary fire support, began a direct assault on the embassy building. Marcus could see them moving in from multiple directions, using vehicles and urban terrain for cover as they advanced on the main entrance. Morrison, still crouched behind the reception desk, stared at Marcus with a mixture of awe and confusion. The man he had dismissed as paranoid and unreliable had just demonstrated shooting skills that bordered on the impossible. The precision of that shot under those conditions suggested training and experience far beyond anything an ordinary security guard should possess. "Thompson," Morrison called out, his voice barely audible over the continuing gunfire. "What aren't you telling us?" Marcus glanced back at his superior, and for just a moment Morrison saw something in his eyes that made him understand why his warnings had been so insistent. This wasn't just a security guard with military experience. This was someone whose capabilities had been forged in the most dangerous operations his country had ever conducted. "Sir," Marcus replied quietly, "I tried to tell you yesterday that we had a problem. Right now we need to focus on keeping everyone alive until the police arrive." With the sniper eliminated, Marcus shifted his attention to the ground assault team that was now advancing on multiple fronts. Through his scope, he could see at least 6 attackers moving with military precision toward the embassy building. They were using classic urban warfare tactics, advancing under cover while maintaining communication with each other through hand signals and radio contact. Marcus's years of experience allowed him to read their movement patterns instantly. The attackers were dividing into 2 main groups, one approaching from the east side of the building where the staff parking garage was located, and another moving toward the main entrance. Their goal appeared to be creating multiple breach points simultaneously, overwhelming the building's defenses through sheer numbers and coordination. Sarah Chen, still positioned behind the concrete planter, called out desperately to Marcus. "How many are there? What do they want?" Her voice carried the strain of someone who had never been in a real firefight before. All her training scenarios and simulation exercises had failed to prepare her for the chaos and terror of actual combat. Marcus quickly assessed the tactical situation. The embassy building offered some defensive advantages: thick walls, limited entry points, and clear sight lines from certain positions. However, the attackers had clearly studied these same features and were working to neutralize them. They were using smoke grenades to obscure vision and moving in short, coordinated rushes to minimize their exposure. "Morrison," Marcus called out, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to transform him completely. "Get everyone inside to the safe room on the 2nd floor. Lock down all ground floor access points and stay away from the windows." Morrison, still struggling to process what he was witnessing, hesitated for a moment. The quiet, dismissed security guard was now giving orders with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. There was something in Marcus's voice that compelled obedience, a quality that could only come from extensive experience in life-or-death situations. "Move now," Marcus emphasized, and this time Morrison didn't hesitate. He began herding embassy staff and visitors toward the interior stairwell, following emergency protocols that suddenly seemed inadequate for the reality they were facing. Marcus repositioned himself to cover the main entrance, using his knowledge of the building's layout to find angles that would give him the best tactical advantage. His movements were fluid and efficient, displaying a spatial awareness that amazed his colleagues. He seemed to know instinctively where threats would appear and how to counter them effectively. The first direct assault came from the eastern parking garage entrance. 3 attackers had managed to breach the perimeter fence and were now attempting to force their way through the reinforced door leading into the building's lower level. Marcus could hear the distinctive sound of explosives being prepared. They intended to blast their way through the embassy's defenses. David Walsh, who had been frozen behind the embassy vehicle, found his courage and attempted to provide support. He moved toward a position where he could observe the eastern approach, but his movements were clumsy and exposed. Marcus could see immediately that Walsh's military police background had not prepared him for this level of combat intensity. "Walsh, stay down and call for backup," Marcus instructed firmly. "Give them our exact position and tell them we have multiple armed attackers with military-grade equipment. Emphasize that this is not a domestic incident. These people are professionals." The explosion came exactly when Marcus expected it, blowing out the eastern entrance door and sending debris flying across the parking garage. Through the smoke and confusion, he could see the attackers preparing to enter the building. They moved with the disciplined coordination of a special operations unit, checking corners and communicating constantly with each other. Marcus made a decision that would have been impossible for any ordinary security guard. Instead of waiting for the attackers to advance further into the building, he moved to intercept them directly. Using service corridors and maintenance passages that most people didn't know existed, he positioned himself to engage the assault team before they could reach the main embassy areas. Sarah Chen watched in astonishment as Marcus seemed to simply vanish from his position, disappearing into the building with a speed and stealth that defied explanation. One moment he had been providing covering fire from the main entrance, and the next he was gone, leaving behind only the sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. Inside the building, Marcus moved through the corridors with absolute silence, his footsteps making no sound on the polished floors. Years of training in covert operations had taught him how to move unseen and unheard, even in hostile environments. The embassy's layout was now an advantage he could exploit fully. He reached the eastern corridor just as the first attacker rounded the corner from the parking garage entrance. The man was heavily armed and wearing tactical gear, but his focus was on the main corridor ahead. He never saw Marcus approaching from the side passage until it was too late. The engagement was swift and decisive. Marcus's hand-to-hand combat skills, honed through years of special operations training, allowed him to neutralize the first attacker without firing a shot. The man's weapon was now in Marcus's hands, along with his radio equipment and tactical gear. Through the captured radio, Marcus could hear the communications between the remaining attackers. They were speaking in accented English, coordinating their movements and reporting on their progress. More importantly, he learned that this was not a random attack. They were specifically looking for certain diplomatic, personnel, and classified documents housed in the embassy. The second and third attackers entered the building more cautiously, having heard their colleagues' radio go silent. Marcus waited until they had committed to the corridor before engaging them simultaneously. His movement was so fast and precise that neither attacker had time to call for help before being incapacitated. Morrison's voice crackled over the embassy's internal communication system, calling for an update on the situation. Marcus keyed his radio and responded in the same calm, authoritative voice that had been giving orders throughout the crisis. Eastern approach is secure. Multiple attackers neutralized. Proceeding to secure the main entrance. The response left his colleagues speechless. In the space of perhaps 10 minutes, Marcus had single-handedly eliminated half of the assault team and completely changed the tactical balance of the engagement. The quiet, unremarkable guard they thought they knew had revealed himself to be something far more formidable. Sarah Chen's voice came over the radio, filled with amazement and confusion. "Marcus, how are you doing this? What kind of training do you have?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was already moving toward the main entrance, where the remaining attackers were likely regrouping after losing contact with their eastern team. The advantage of surprise was still on his side, but it wouldn't last long. Professional attackers would quickly adapt to the changed circumstances and modify their tactics accordingly. "Chen," he finally replied, "my training is something I'll explain later. Right now I need you to maintain your position and keep the main corridor under observation. The remaining attackers will likely attempt a frontal assault when they realize their eastern team has been compromised." As if responding to his prediction, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of vehicles moving outside the main entrance. The attackers were indeed regrouping, bringing additional resources to bear on what they had expected to be a simple operation. They were about to discover that their intelligence had been incomplete in one crucial respect. They had no idea who they were really fighting against. The sound of approaching sirens began to echo through the London streets, but Marcus knew that police response times meant the remaining attackers still had several minutes to complete their mission. Through the embassy's main windows, he could see them regrouping around 2 additional vehicles that had just arrived as reinforcements. The operation was larger and more sophisticated than even he had initially assessed. Marcus positioned himself at a strategic vantage point that allowed him to observe the main approach while remaining concealed from outside observation. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The newly arrived vehicles contained at least 4 additional operatives, and they were unloading equipment that included shaped explosive charges and what appeared to be a portable rocket launcher. The radio communications he had intercepted earlier now made perfect sense. This wasn't just an assault on the embassy. It was a precision operation designed to eliminate specific diplomatic personnel and destroy sensitive intelligence materials. The attackers were prepared to level the entire building if necessary to achieve their objectives. Morrison's voice came over the internal communication system, tight with stress and confusion. Thompson, police are en route, but they're estimating at least 8 minutes before armed response units arrive. Can you hold them off that long? 8 minutes might as well have been 8 hours in a tactical situation like this. Marcus calculated quickly. With the firepower the attackers had brought to bear, they could breach the embassy's remaining defenses in half that time. The building's security systems designed to deter conventional criminals were inadequate against military-grade assault equipment. Morrison, Marcus replied calmly, I need you to understand something. These people aren't planning to wait for police arrival. They're going to finish this operation in the next few minutes, and they're prepared to kill everyone in the building to do it. I'm going to stop them, but I need you to trust me completely. Sarah Chen, monitoring the radio frequency from her position, interrupted with a question that had been building since the crisis began. Marcus, the way you're handling this, the weapons, the tactics, the way you seem to know exactly what they're going to do next. This isn't normal security training. Who are you, really? Marcus paused for a moment, knowing that his answer would fundamentally change how his colleagues viewed him forever. The careful anonymity he had maintained for months was about to be shattered, but the lives of innocent people depended on his willingness to reveal the truth about his capabilities. My name is Marcus Thompson, he said quietly into his radio. Serial number 245577739. I served 8 years with the Special Air Service, including 3 deployments to Afghanistan and 2 to Syria. I was designated a specialist marksman and completed over 40 successful operations before my discharge. The reason I never talked about my military service is because most of it is still classified. The silence that followed his revelation was profound. Morrison, Chen, and Walsh all absorbed this information with varying degrees of shock and understanding. Suddenly, Marcus's ability to spot threats, his precision shooting, and his tactical awareness made perfect sense. They hadn't been working alongside an ordinary security guard. They had been in the presence of one of Britain's elite soldiers. David Walsh's voice came over the radio, filled with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. SAS, your Special Air Service? Why didn't you tell us? Why are you working as a security guard? Marcus's answer revealed a depth of personal sacrifice that none of his colleagues had imagined. Because after 8 years of war zones, I wanted a quiet job where I could protect people without having to kill anyone. I thought embassy security would be routine, peaceful work. I never expected to need these skills again. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on any of them. Marcus had sought out the most mundane security position he could find, hoping to leave his warrior past behind, only to find himself in exactly the kind of situation his military training had prepared him for. The peaceful anonymity he had craved was about to be replaced by a return to the deadly skills that defined his previous life. Outside the building, the attackers had completed their preparations and were beginning their final assault. Marcus could see them moving into position around the building's perimeter, preparing to execute a coordinated attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Their movements displayed the kind of professional discipline that confirmed his assessment. These were not ordinary criminals or terrorists, but trained military operatives conducting a precision mission. Everyone stay in the safe room, Marcus commanded, his voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death leadership. Do not come out for any reason until I give the all-clear signal. If you don't hear from me in the next 10 minutes, assume I'm down and wait for police response. Morrison's voice carried a note of desperate concern. Thompson, you can't handle this alone. There are too many of them, and they have heavy weapons. Wait for backup. Marcus's response revealed the cold calculation that had made him one of the SAS's most effective operatives. Sir, with respect, backup isn't going to arrive in time. These people are professionals and they're going to complete their mission unless I stop them now. This is what I was trained for. The first explosion came from the building's rear entrance, exactly as Marcus had anticipated. The attackers were following a classic multi-point breach protocol, creating chaos and confusion, while forcing the defenders to spread their resources thin. But Marcus wasn't a conventional defender. He was a one-man army with capabilities that the attackers couldn't have. Anticipated, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of combat, Marcus began systematically countering each element of their assault. His knowledge of the building's layout, combined with his tactical expertise, allowed him to position himself where he could maximum damage to their operation while minimizing his own exposure. The captured radio equipment provided him with real-time intelligence about their movements and intentions. He could hear their growing frustration as they discovered that their carefully planned operation was being dismantled by a single individual whose existence they had never factored into their preparations. Sarah Chen, monitoring the situation from the safe room, listened to the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoing through the building with growing amazement. The pattern of engagement told a story that seemed almost impossible. Marcus was not only holding his position against overwhelming odds, but actually pushing the attackers back. How was he doing this? She whispered to Morrison, who was equally stunned by what they were witnessing. The man they had dismissed as overly cautious and possibly paranoid was single-handedly defending the entire embassy against a professional military assault. Morrison's radio crackled with an incoming transmission from the London Metropolitan Police. Embassy security. This is Armed Response Unit 7. We are approximately 4 minutes from your location. Can you confirm the status of hostiles and civilians? Morrison keyed his radio with hands that were no longer shaking. For the first time since the crisis began, he felt a spark of hope. Armed Response, this is Embassy Chief of Security Morrison. We have one security operative engaging approximately 8 to 10 armed hostiles. All civilians are secure in safe room. Be advised, our operative is former SAS and is currently holding the building against the assault. The pause that followed this transmission suggested that the police unit was having as much difficulty processing this information as Morrison had experienced earlier. The idea that a single individual could be successfully defending against a coordinated military assault seemed beyond belief, but the evidence was undeniable. As the police sirens grew louder, the remaining attackers realized their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Marcus could hear the urgency in their radio communications as they shifted from a methodical assault to a desperate attempt to complete their mission before authorities arrived. This change in tactics made them more dangerous, but also more predictable. The attack intensified dramatically as the operatives abandoned their careful approach and began using their heavy weapons indiscriminately. The portable rocket launcher Marcus had observed earlier was brought into play, sending explosive rounds into the embassy's lower level. The building shook with each impact, and Marcus could feel debris raining down from damaged ceiling tiles. Through his captured radio equipment, Marcus learned that the attackers' primary objective was not just destruction, but the capture of a specific diplomatic pouch that contained intelligence materials. They needed to breach the embassy's secure vault on the second floor, which explained why they were willing to risk such a prolonged engagement despite the approaching police response. Marcus made a tactical decision that would have seemed impossible to his colleagues just hours earlier. Instead of continuing to defend from static positions, he began actively hunting the remaining attackers throughout the building. His movement was so silent and efficient that they had no warning before he appeared behind them, eliminating threats with the precision of someone who had spent years perfecting these exact skills. The transformation was complete now. The quiet, dismissed security guard had become a deadly force that moved through the embassy like a ghost. His colleagues, monitoring the situation from the safe room, could only listen to the brief radio transmissions and occasional gunfire that marked Marcus's progress through the building. Sarah Chen found herself holding her breath each time the radio went silent, fearing that Marcus had finally encountered opposition he couldn't overcome. But each time his calm voice would return with updates that seemed to defy probability. Third floor secure. 2 hostiles neutralized. Proceeding to second floor vault area. David Walsh, whose earlier criticism of Marcus now seemed embarrassingly ignorant, whispered to Morrison, "How is one person doing this? Even if he is SS, there were at least 10 of them with military equipment." Morrison, who was beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were witnessing, replied quietly, "Walsh, we don't know who Marcus really was in the SAS. For all we know, he was one of their most elite operatives. The fact that he never talked about his service suggests his missions were highly classified." The radio communications from the attackers became increasingly frantic as their numbers dwindled. Marcus could hear them calling for immediate extraction, abandoning their original mission objectives in favor of simple survival. Their professional discipline was breaking down under the pressure of losses they couldn't explain or counter. At that moment, Marcus realized something that changed his entire approach to the situation. These weren't just random operatives. They were speaking with accents and using terminology that suggested they were foreign intelligence agents conducting an operation against British interests. This wasn't terrorism. It was espionage that had turned violent when their infiltration was detected. The revelation added a new dimension to Marcus's mission. These operatives couldn't be allowed to escape with whatever intelligence they had gathered, and their capture would provide valuable counterintelligence opportunities. Instead of simply defending until police arrived, Marcus needed to prevent their extraction entirely. Moving with renewed purpose, Marcus positioned himself to intercept the attackers' retreat routes. His knowledge of urban warfare tactics allowed him to predict exactly how they would attempt to disengage from the operation. The same skills that had made him effective in hostile territories overseas were now being applied to the streets of London. The sound of approaching helicopters added urgency to the situation. Marcus could see through the windows that police-armed response units were beginning to establish a perimeter around the embassy. But the attackers had positioned their extraction vehicles in locations that would allow them to escape before the perimeter could be fully established. Marcus's radio crackled with a transmission from the police command unit. Embassy Security, this is Inspector Harrison. Metropolitan Police Armed Response. We need immediate intelligence on hostile positions and capabilities before we can proceed with containment. Morrison responded, but deferred to Marcus for tactical information. Inspector, you need to speak directly with our operative Thompson. He has complete situational awareness and tactical command of the engagement. The pause that followed suggested Inspector Harrison was having difficulty processing the idea that a single security guard was directing a counterterrorism operation. When Marcus's voice came over the radio, calm and professional despite the chaos around him, it carried an authority that commanded immediate respect. Inspector Harrison, this is Thompson. You have approximately 6 hostile operatives attempting to extract from the building with sensitive intelligence materials. They have 2 vehicles positioned for escape at the southeast and northwest corners of the perimeter. They are armed with military-grade weapons and have demonstrated willingness to use lethal force against civilians. Harrison's response revealed his growing understanding of whom he was dealing with. Thompson, your assessment suggests significant tactical experience. What's your recommendation for containment? Marcus's answer demonstrated the strategic thinking that had made him valuable to the SAS command structure. Inspector, these operatives cannot be allowed to escape. They have intelligence value for counterterrorism purposes, and they represent an ongoing threat to embassy personnel. I recommend coordinated containment with focus on their extraction vehicles while I maintain pressure on their positions within the building. The coordination between Marcus and the police response demonstrated a level of professional competence that amazed his colleagues. Here was the man they had dismissed as paranoid and unreliable, now directing a complex operation involving multiple law enforcement agencies with the confidence of someone who had commanded similar situations many times before. As police units moved to secure the extraction vehicles, the trapped operatives made a final desperate attempt to fight their way out of the building. They concentrated their remaining firepower on the main entrance, hoping to create a breach large enough for them to escape before the police perimeter could be completed. Marcus was ready for them. Positioned at a tactical advantage point that allowed him to engage multiple targets simultaneously, he waited until they had committed to their assault before revealing his position. The engagement was brief but decisive, demonstrating shooting skills that left the responding police officers speechless with admiration. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence that followed was profound. Marcus's voice came over the radio one final time, calm and professional as it had been throughout the crisis. All hostiles neutralized, building secure, embassy personnel safe, requesting medical assistance for wounded operatives and immediate security sweep for intelligence materials. Inspector Harrison's voice carried a note of awe that he couldn't entirely suppress. Thompson, we're coming in. Outstanding work. We'll need a full debrief when you're ready. Marcus's response revealed the humility that had characterized his behavior throughout his time at the embassy. Inspector, I was just doing my job. The real credit goes to my colleagues who maintained security protocols and kept civilians safe throughout the engagement. But his colleagues knew better. They had witnessed something extraordinary. the emergence of capabilities that had been hidden beneath the surface of an ordinary security job. The quiet man they thought they knew had revealed himself to be one of the most formidable soldiers his country had ever produced. In the aftermath of the crisis, as police investigators combed through the embassy and paramedics attended to the wounded operatives, Marcus found himself sitting in a quiet conference room being debriefed by officials whose security clearances were high enough to understand the full implications of what had occurred. Inspector Harrison had been replaced by personnel from MI5 and the Ministry of Defense, individuals who recognized Marcus's name from classified files and understood exactly who they were dealing with. The quiet security guard who had been dismissed by his colleagues was now being treated with the respect reserved for national assets of the highest value. James Morrison, Sarah Chen, and David Walsh waited in an adjacent room, still processing the dramatic revelation of Marcus's true identity and capabilities. The man they had worked alongside for 8 months had been one of the most elite soldiers in the British military, and they had never suspected it for even a moment. Sarah Chen broke the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the group. How did we miss it? I mean, now that I think back, there were signs. The way he carried himself, his situational awareness, the fact that he never talked about his past. We just assumed he was ordinary. Morrison, whose dismissal of Marcus's warnings now seemed painfully ignorant, shook his head slowly. We saw what we expected to see. A quiet guy with some military experience working a basic security job. We never imagined that someone with his background would choose this kind of work. David Walsh, whose earlier comments about paranoia now embarrassed him deeply, added his own reflection. I actually told him he was seeing threats where none existed. I criticized his vigilance, said he was being paranoid. The irony is that his paranoia is exactly what saved all our lives. Through the conference room's glass walls, they could see Marcus speaking calmly with the intelligence officials, his demeanor unchanged despite having just single-handedly neutralized a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation. He appeared as modest and unassuming as he had during his months of ordinary security work. The debrief lasted several hours, during which Marcus provided detailed intelligence about the attackers' methods, equipment, and apparent objectives. His tactical analysis helped MI5 understand that this had been a carefully planned operation by a foreign intelligence service attempting to steal classified diplomatic communications and eliminate witnesses. When the official interviews were complete, Marcus finally rejoined his colleagues in the waiting room. The atmosphere was awkward. How do you interact normally with someone who has just revealed himself to be something far beyond your understanding or experience? Morrison was the first to speak, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. Marcus, I owe you an apology. More than that, I owe you my life, and the lives of everyone in that building. My failure to listen to your warnings could have resulted in a catastrophe. Marcus's response was characteristically modest. James, you couldn't have known what you were dealing with. My job was to provide security, and I should have been more effective at communicating the threat. The failure was mine, not yours. Sarah Chen leaned forward, her curiosity overcoming her embarrassment. Marcus, can I ask you something? If you were SAS, if you had those incredible skills and that level of training, why were you working as an embassy security guard? Why hide who you really were? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering how much of his personal story to share. Finally, he began to explain the journey that had brought him to their small security team. After 8 years of operations in war zones, I was tired of fighting, tired of violence, tired of the constant threat of death, tired of having to use these skills to kill people. I wanted a normal life, a quiet job where I could use my training to protect people without having to hurt anyone. His words revealed a depth of war weariness that none of them had imagined. The elite soldier they had just witnessed in action was also a man seeking peace after years of conflict. His choice to work in embassy security hadn't been a step down from his previous career. It had been a deliberate attempt to find meaning in protection rather than destruction. David Walsh, still struggling with his earlier dismissal of Marcus's concerns, asked the question that was troubling all of them. How do you go back to normal after something like this? I mean, for us, this was the most intense day of our careers. For you, was this just Tuesday? Marcus's smile was sad and knowing. David, there's nothing normal about today. Yes, I've been in similar situations before, but that doesn't make them easier. Every time you use these skills, every time violence becomes necessary, it costs you something. I had hoped those days were behind me. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a senior official from the Ministry of Defense, someone whose presence indicated that Marcus's future was about to be discussed at levels far above embassy security. The quiet life he had sought was about to become impossible to maintain. Morrison realized that their small security team was about to lose the most capable member they had ever had, probably to assignments that would once again require the deadly skills they had just witnessed. Marcus, they're going to want you back, aren't they? Back to the kind of operations you were trying to leave behind. Marcus nodded slowly. Probably. Today's events have made it clear that these skills are still needed, and hiding from that responsibility isn't really an option anymore. But I want you all to know that these past 8 months, working with you, having quiet days where the most serious incident was a false alarm, those were some of the best months I've had in years. As the officials prepared to escort Marcus away for further briefings and what would undoubtedly be new assignment discussions, his colleagues realized they were saying goodbye to someone they had never really known, but had come to respect immensely in the space of a few hours. Sarah Chen stood up and extended her hand. Marcus, whatever happens next, thank you for keeping us safe, and thank you for showing us what real professionalism looks like under pressure. Morrison added his own farewell. Thompson, it's been an honor working with you, even if I was too blind to recognize it at the time. Whatever they assign you to next, you'll have our complete confidence and admiration. David Walsh, humbled by his earlier skepticism, simply said, I'm sorry I doubted you. You're everything a soldier should be. Marcus shook hands with each of them, his expression grateful, but tinged with the sadness of someone who had found peace only to have it taken away by circumstances beyond his control. As he walked away with the government officials, his colleagues watched the departure of a man who had proven that true heroism often wears the most ordinary disguise. In the months that followed, the embassy security team would often discuss that extraordinary day, when their quiet colleague revealed himself to be one of the most formidable soldiers their country had ever produced. They learned to look beyond appearances, to value competence over charisma, and to understand that the most dangerous people are often the ones who seem most ordinary. Marcus Thompson returned to the shadows of classified operations. His brief attempt at a normal life ended by the very skills that made him invaluable to his country's security. But somewhere in London, 3 security guards continued their work with a deeper understanding of what real professionalism looked like, and a lasting respect for the silent guardian who had saved their lives.